There's modern technology, I could do that.
Hey, Henry.
Hey, Henry.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The hour is 7 o'clock, and as mayor, I hereby call to order a meeting of Laconia City Council scheduled for September 9th, 2019 at this time. As always, we'll begin our meeting tonight with a salute to our American flag. I would ask that you please rise and join Councilor Mark Haynes in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll note for the record that the minutes to tonight's meeting are being kept by City Clerk Cheryl Hebert. At this time, I would ask that she please call the roll.
Counselor Cheney,
Here.
Counselor Bounds,
Present.
Counselor Whitman,
Also present.
Counselor Haynes,
Here.
Counselor Hamel,
Present.
Counselor Hosmer,
Here.
Oh,
Mary
wow,
Angler.
no, we changed here. Councilor Rounds,
The
Put
first
me
time.
right on the
It's
spot, don't you?
Time to put some change in. First
I
time.
want to follow your lead, Councilor. Present. Present wins 4-3. Okay, let the record show that all 6 councilors are present or here tonight. And a quorum has been established for our meeting. Also note for the record that the council is joined at the front table tonight by City Manager Scott Myers and by our City Finance Director Glenn Smith. First item of regular business is acceptance of minutes. Before you councilors tonight, you have the minutes to our last meeting on August 26th. They were distributed to the council 3 days later. As of tonight, no corrections or changes have been suggested to the clerk, and so if there are none at this hour, I'm going to declare the minutes to our last meeting on August 26th, 2019 to be approved as submitted by the clerk. Consent and action items, we have one tonight having to do with the Laconia Homecoming Parade on Friday, October 20th, no changes. This is for the homecoming parade. A motion be in order to approve temporary traffic order 2019-14, Laconia High School Homecoming Parade to be held on September 20, 2019 from 4 to 5 p.m. Councilor Hosmer makes that motion. Councilor Lippman seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. Okay, we have no interviews or nomination elections tonight. We do have one procedural public hearing to conduct tonight. And this has to
Mr. Mayor, if I
do-
could, I think we need to do number 9.
Oh, wait
citizens'
a minute,
comments.
citizen comment, thank you. Getting ahead of myself. Citizen comments for matters not on the agenda. This is the appropriate place on our program tonight for anyone to rise who wishes to address the council on any matter that is not on tonight's agenda. Does that meet the definition for anyone here tonight? Something that is not on tonight's agenda. No, not even Representative St. Clair. Disappointing us here tonight.
No, he's not.
All right.
Was that audible?
Yes, it was.
We'll move on to, you'll have a chance to comment on items that are on the agenda tonight, a little later in our meeting, if that's why you're here tonight. Public hearings, we have one to conduct tonight. Call your attention, Councilors, to page 19 with the actual resolution printed on page 36. You'll recall at our last meeting that we needed to go back and revisit the issue of the Colonial Theater renovation borrowing because of a procedural issue where the bond council was recommending that we reference 2 state RSAs in passing our resolution instead of 1, and that's the only, so that's exactly what this is all about. So we need to have a public hearing on this tonight, and then we'll vote on second and final reading on passing the resolution later on tonight under unfinished business. So at this point in time, at 7:04 p.m., I'm going to call to order a public hearing relative to Resolution 21, relative to the bonding to finance the repair and restoration of the historic Colonial Theater. Notice of this public hearing was made available in the August 28, 2019 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at City Hall, the Community Center, the Public Library, and at the SAU office. The fiscal impact for fiscal year 2020 would be first-year interest payments of $175,000. So I'll open the public hearing now at 7:05 and ask if there's anyone who wishes to address the council on the matter of passing of Resolution 21 relative to the repair and restoration of the historic Colonial Theater. Oh, all right, I'll declare the public hearing closed at 7:06 PM and again state that we will take this up again under unfinished business tonight. We have no presentations tonight, so we are already to the mayor's report. And I have a couple of things I'd like to mention tonight. The first is that it was almost exactly a year ago that we had coaches and players from the Eastern League Hockey League and Eastern Hockey League Premier division from the representatives from the New England Wolves based here in Laconia, and honored them with a resolution based on the fact that they had been given their league's first humanitarian award for outstanding community service of all the teams and clubs in that league, if you'll recall that. And so the good news have to pass along tonight is that the Wolves have again, for the second year, been named their league's winner of the 2019-2020 humanitarian award. So we want to congratulate not only all the players, but the coaches, Andrew Trimmel and Kim Coons, and their staff for not only for the excellent hockey that they provide at the ice arena every winter, but also for the tremendous job they do in terms of contributing to the betterment of life in our community. As an example, I was just looking at something this afternoon where Becky Geyer, who heads up the multicultural festival that was just completed for the 19th time on Saturday of this past weekend, and she went out of her way to compliment the Wolves because, as she put it, they provided the muscle for getting everything set up for the event and whatnot, and the takedown and whatnot, and that is indicative. They also have been involved in Wild Trail cleanup in the Pumpkin Fest setup and takedown, the United Way's Day of Caring, the Laconia Christmas Village cleanup. Councilor Hamill can attest to that. The Guilford Rotary Christmas tree sale, and the list goes on and on. They also participate in youth hockey programs, Learn to Skate, and other such similar programs, toy drives, Humane Society donation night, and the list goes on and on. So once again, our sincere appreciation and thanks to Coach Trimble, Coach Coons, and the players who are members of the two New England Wolves hockey teams, as I said, based here in Laconia. Do you have a border again this winter?
Norway and Massachusetts.
Two of them?
Yes.
All right. So Councilor Haynes is a
Whose family?
host family for the Wolves, and this year is again hosting two players at his home for the winter. Second thing that I'd like to mention is there's been considerable coverage in the newspaper and on social media in recent weeks with regard to the situation, the code enforcement situation at 501 Roller Coaster Road that I think we're probably all familiar with by now. And I wanted to address that briefly because I think the city employees have been taking a kind of the brunt of the situation there very unfairly, in my opinion. And I kind of wanted to address that last night. We, being the city government, and I say we being the people around this table, the elected representatives of the people, are governed by our own statute ordinance that licenses, that has to do with junkyards that do not have state licenses. You can get a license to run a junkyard, but if you don't have a license to run a junkyard, then there's severe limitations, not only put on by the city, but also by the state in terms of how many unkept vehicles and other equipment and whatnot you can have on your property and that sort of thing. So it's governed by not only local ordinance, but also by state law. And the owner of this particular property has received 11 letters over the years asking him to clean up his property, and he has ignored them all. And so the city, which typically goes out of its way to work with people to try to get them to clean up their property, took the somewhat extraordinary action of going to court and looking for enforcement there. One of the points I wanted to make is that this is a completely non-selective enforcement in the sense that the city code enforcement people are not picking on this gentleman any more so than they would on anyone else in terms of violations. And so he has not been singled out or anything like that. It would be the same in any part of the city. It would be the same for any similar circumstance or anything close to a similar circumstance. I think it would be fair to say that perhaps with the exception of potholes, the members of the council receive more complaints about building code violations around the city, particularly yard upkeep and building upkeep and whatnot, than any other single factor. And because of that, decades ago, this is nothing new, decades ago, the city passed these ordinances about what you can do and cannot do on your property. In addition to that, we have also, as a city, this council, adopted the International Property Maintenance Code, which sets standards for everything from excessive peeling paint to unkept yards and whatnot. And it gives the city the statutory ability to be able to seek remedies for cleaning up said messes. So I think one headline I saw in the paper said, that was reporting on the court case, said something like, is this a junkyard or just a junky yard? And I think in the bottom line is it doesn't matter, that we have ordinances in effect preventing both. And the other thing I want to mention is, and this has become a pet peeve in my 6th and final year of serving as your mayor, perhaps more than anything else, is the number of people who refer to the city as it's some sort of a mythical beast, like a dragon or something or other, that we as residents of Laconia have no control over. It just does what it wants when it wants, and the rest of us are just hapless victims of, quote, the city. And I just want to point out that nothing could be further from the truth. The city is us. We are the city. We make the rules. The staff simply enforces the rules that we make, this council makes as representatives of the people. And so if you don't like the rules, and that's fair enough, and you think that there shouldn't be a rule against what's happening at 501 Roller Coaster Road or whatever, then you have every opportunity to lobby the people who are your elected representatives around the council to change that rule, or you have obviously the opportunity to run for office yourself and become a member of this body and change it. But I just want to stress again that we are the city. We make the rules. The city staff does not make the rules. The policy starts and stops by the people who sit around this board. Okay, and if you don't like the policy, then come to us and tell us so. And if we don't agree with you, then the next thing to do is don't vote for us, vote for somebody else. Thank you. Committee reports. I understand we had a Government Operations and Ordinance Committee meeting, and the subject was scenic road motorcycle noise petition. Councilor Bounds.
Yeah, it'll be a brief report. There aren't any recommendations to the council at this time. Public Works, Wes was here, Chief Canfield was here, and we discussed various options, signs, different kinds of options to address the issues down on Scenic Road on a substantive basis. The committee agreed to throw it into the city manager's lap, let him work with the various departments and come up with some recommendations, and then come back to the full council. Simple.
Okay, so we're keeping the item on the agenda.
We'll keep the item on the agenda. Go ahead.
Councilor Hamel.
While we're on Scenic Road, and the city manager's gonna look into it, it might be a good idea to look into that corner, where there's been several fatalities every bike week and actually even throughout the year. Maybe look into some kind of a signaling light, that you're approaching, or better awareness of what's ahead. It's a dark area, you come up on the curve pretty quick. I know there's a few signs there, but I think they need to be stepped up a little more to give warning of what's in that corner, and unfortunately, especially around Bike Week.
I think that's all on the table. I think that was discussed.
That was discussed,
That was
okay.
discussed.
I wasn't here,
and
so,
it's on the table, and we'll see what
okay, thank you.
comes up with it.
So are we talking about some kind of a year-round regulation or just motorcycle week?
I don't think we're talking about, well, let me preface it, we're not talking specifically about Motorcycle Week. We're probably talking more this seasonal aspect of the Weirs and Scenic Road. There may be things that may overlap, like Pumpkin Fest or things like that, some of the things that are going on at the Weirs this fall, but
But what is it the residents want? That's what I'm asking. Are they,
they had, their specific petition had a number of different suggestions, including noise violations, speed bumps, all kinds of different suggestions. We took all of those suggestions and sort of honed it down into what we thought was practical. Look at the lighting situation, look at a signage situation, look at some kind of warning stuff, and have the city manager put together that package. And then we didn't think it was necessary for another committee meeting, so we'll just bring back those recommendations to the council. One of the things that I said is that this is not going to be an effort that ends when the fall is over, but we're going to make sure that we're doing something about it when the season springs anew next year, so.
okay, any other committee business tonight? How about liaison
Yes.
reports? More committee business?
Yeah,
Okay.
just keeping you up to date. The short-term residential ordinance came out of the planning board with a recommendation to the city council to adopt the ordinance. There were some amendments. I think we'll hear, that'll be on the agenda at the second meeting in September, and we'll be discussing that at that time. The paid parking proposal for downtown, I'm waiting on you to give me the go-ahead once we get that survey done with respect to where that's going, if anywhere.
At the rate we're going, my name's gonna be, you're gonna be reading it on a tombstone long before.
I'm gonna make it a point to drag you here to the city council meeting. I'm gonna find you
Send the
and get you
police.
here. The proposed historic overlay district is still in committee. There were a number of recommendations that were made. There didn't seem to be a good enough consensus to bring it to the planning board. So I think the plan is to do another committee meeting, is that right? And then take the recommendations and move it to the planning board and see what they want to do with it and move it on. I have one other question. With respect to Public Works Committee and the retaining wall policy, Are we done with that? I thought we were done with that. Yes? So I want to make a motion to remove that from the agenda.
Counselor Bounds
16E.
makes a motion to remove item 16E1, retaining wall policy, from the agenda of the Public Works Committee. Is there a second to that? Counselor Hosmer seconds the motion. Any discussion? All those in favor of removing that item, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. We'll ask the clerk to do that for us. You have committee business?
Just that there's a finance committee following tonight's council meeting.
Yes, thank you. Okay, any liaison reports tonight?
I sort of
Mayor.
gave you the
You have a,
liaison report.
you have a meeting of the, I'm sorry,
When you're ready, that's. No, we have a meeting this week.
the Heritage Commission, right? So has that legal issue been settled, or?
I would refer to the city manager.
The majority of the members of the Heritage Commission, the planning director, Dean Trefethen, and myself, and legal counsel did meet, and we were provided with some background of various commission members' involvement of things, and some legal advice was supplied. And ultimately, it is an individual's decision to determine if they have a conflict, and if they determine there's a conflict, to recuse themselves from a particular item. So we have met and shared and educated, and it's in each person's individual lap, so to speak.
That's real careful. Thank you.
No one, I mean, people can ask for an advisory opinion from the chair or members of the commission as to whether they feel they should, but it comes down, it's an individual decision if somebody needs to recuse themselves.
So it does not come down to a decision of the board itself,
Correct.
commission itself? They can't vote to make
Correct.
somebody recuse themselves?
Somebody could raise a point of order and raise that for the record of don't you think you should, or I'm asking you to consider this, but it's an individual decision.
Counselor Cheney?
As liaison to the police department, I'm pleased to point out to the council that last week there were promotions at the police department, including Captain Michael Finogel, who served in the United States Army for 5 years as a military police officer, serving in Puerto Rico for 3 years and 2 years at Fort Lewis in Washington. He holds an associate's degree in criminal justice while working on his bachelor's degree. He has been a Laconia police officer for over 20 years. It says that he created the first department canine unit, which happens to be inaccurate because a guy by the name of Dave Gunter had a dog back in the 70s, but in any case, and gained a lot of notoriety around the state for his work in this area. He was a drug recognition expert instructor and taught this program all over the state while also gaining recognition as a grade officer and a DWI investigator. Also promoted was Lieutenant Chris Noyes. Chris's father worked for me at the police department back in the 70s and 80s, and it was a pleasure for me to see him promoted to lieutenant. He began his career as a part-time police officer with the University of New Hampshire Police, became a full-time officer in 1999. In 2002, he was hired with Laconia, where he has been a patrol officer, a mountain bike officer, a field training officer, detective, and patrol sergeant. He served a year's assignment with the New Hampshire Attorney General's Drug Task Force and also helped to build our drug unit. He holds an associate's degree in criminal justice from the New Hampshire Technical Institute. Also, a great personal pleasure is the promotion of Lieutenant Gary Hubbard. Gary worked for me when I was the chief here in Laconia. He is an outstanding man. He served honorably in the United States Marine Corps for 28 years, where he retired as a sergeant major, a very prestigious accomplishment. During his tenure with the Marine Corps, he served in combat deployments in Operation Iraq Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, Operation Iraqi Enduring Freedom in Okinawa, Japan, and the Philippines, as well as Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield in Kuwait. He holds a master's degree in business administration from Southern New Hampshire University, and he has served as a Laconia police officer for nearly 31 years and has held assignments in every part of the department. Promoted to sergeant was Michelle Cardinal. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in criminal justice and has been a Laconia police officer for 11 years. She completed an internship with the Laconia Police Department before being hired and beginning her career. She was a DARE officer for 7 years, president of the New Hampshire DARE Officers Association, a master patrol officer, evidence officer, and field training officer. This last gentleman, Sergeant Robert Sedgley, if a promotion could almost take your breath away, this one did mine at one point. Sergeant Sedgley was an explorer with the Laconia Police Department before becoming a police officer, where he's worked for the past 14 years. He has a Master's of Arts in Liberal Studies from Dartmouth College and has been a master police officer, dispatcher, fleet maintenance officer, and field training officer. To say that I would be stunned to have a man with a master's degree from Dartmouth working for me would be a major understatement. I'm so pleased that Laconia has these kinds of people working for it, and I'm pleased to announce to the council these promotions. Thank you.
You bet, and we'll pass along, if I got all these correctly, all of our congratulations to Captain Finogle, Lieutenant Noyes, Lieutenant Hubbard, Sergeant Cardinal, and Sergeant Sedgley. Congratulations to all of you. Any other liaison reports? Okay, now we are to citizens' request to comment on current agenda items. This is the appropriate time tonight for anyone who wishes to address the council on any matter that is on tonight's agenda. Yes, sir. Please identify yourself by name and where you live.
My name is John DeWally, and I am on 26 Heritage Road in Laconia. And I stand in front of you tonight to discuss in more of a fact-finding mission. I haven't had too much time to look into it, but it is my understanding that you would like to remove Colonial and Plantation roads, which my road is off of, from the city's maintenance agenda, if that's correct.
All right, what is correct is that the Department of Public Works is recommending this.
Okay,
This is the first the council has seen or heard of it.
okay,
So it's new to us as well as you. It's a recommendation being made tonight by the Department of Public Works, and it will come before the meeting later tonight.
okay. So do you want to have a discussion on that now, or do you want to have a discussion on that later?
Perfect time, right now.
Okay. So, my concerns lie simply in the fact that this road has been maintained publicly for nearly 40 years. There are a number of residents who have bought on that street. We all were under the impression and were told, and through our own eyes, witnessed public services taking place on those roads. Myself, I bought in August of last year. My family's been vacationing in New Hampshire, and Laconia specifically, since I was a child. So this is one of my favorite places. I enjoy being here. So it was an easy decision to purchase in this city, excuse me. So when I came up, we looked at the home. My street is not plowed by the city, but Colonial and Plantation are. We had trash collection go by on the day that I looked at the house. We have mail at the end of our street, and so do all the other residents who live up there. We pay the same taxes that everybody else pays in this neighborhood. And I have some information here from April of 2018. I don't know if it has been updated since then. It would appear that there was a lot of information at the time that was missing for the city to make a decision. You started on a fact-finding mission in the early 2000s, you stopped in 2008, and then you began again in 2018, a decade later. Costs have gone up since then. There are a lot of residents who potentially would not have bought had those roads been made private. You have a lot of potential issues with mortgages and banks holding notes on homes that they believe are on public roads and now could be made on private roads. It's refinancing problems for some people, and if the city decides to pave those roads to accept them, modern standards, you're looking at assessments that many people can't afford. You're looking at depreciating home values all of a sudden. Now, if I decide to sell, or another resident decides to sell, knowing that the road is going to be maintained at a higher level, all of a sudden there's an assessment that's attached to your taxes, and it makes your home harder to sell. We went through this, and I'm from Rhode Island originally, in Warwick, Rhode Island. They did sewers in Warwick, Rhode Island. Many people had 10-year assessments, $3,500, $4,000 on top of their taxes. That can be difficult for some people to afford, especially if they budgeted a certain amount of money for their living situation as it is now. I think there's a number of issues that lie within the DPU, maintaining the public roads for emergency. Some of the statutes that you have in the city say a road can't be maintained if it's only for the residents. It has to have a greater purpose. I simply look at public utility lines. If a tree falls down on a branch, it could cause a problem anywhere else on Endicott Street and into the other neighborhoods. In here, it also says that that you could suspend city services. Again, you're talking about a tax abatement now to suspend services. And are you threatening residents with suspending services in lieu of getting what you want? It kind of seems sketchy in the information that I have from 2018. A suspension of city services could lead to liability issues for the city, and it could also lead to dangerous situations for residents. I was also told that the hill is too steep, but as you know, if you've driven on it, there are plenty of other roads just coming out of Weirs Beach that are steeper than this road itself, that are well maintained by the city. So we have a lot of concerns as residents in the city. Some residents don't want to stand in front of you for fear of retaliation from city employees or just general services. So we would really like to get the facts on the matter, and we would like to have a discussion as to what the city ultimately wants from this. Our ask is not to improve the road with asphalt. Our ask is simply to maintain what's already there. There is another resident on the street who's offered property to the city before, and that offer still stands, to create two areas halfway down the hill and at the bottom of the hill to collect runoff water so you don't have dirt and water running into Endicott Street. So I think there's a number of solutions that we can come to before any litigation with the precedent that's been set and the maintenance that's been done for the past 40 years on the road.
Okay, thank you for coming tonight, and stay tuned.
Will do.
Anyone else wish to address the council on a matter that is on tonight's agenda?
Wouldn't you know?
I just wanted to,
This is Representative St. Clair.
yes,
for those
thank
of
you.
who
Thank
don't
you very
know.
much, sorry. I wanted to follow up what Councilor David Bounds said. Councilor, when you mentioned that, you mentioned Pumpkin Fest, I think about noise, and then you said, we want to get this going. I'm referring to the noise on Scenic Road by next season. But the way I look at it, and I've heard from other people, this is a problem not just regulated or contained on Scenic Road, and it's certainly year-round. We have people not just on motorcycles, but cars that are modified to be very loud. I have no idea why. Our former chief of police here, I'm sure, can attest to this was a problem back when he was chief, that some people would, no, of course not, that some people would just be loud for loud sake. So I hope whatever the committee does, whether it's signage or something like this, is that maybe they can place some of these signs if there's something asking people to ride quiet or whatever you end up doing, can be done in other sensitive places where we've heard from, perhaps Old North Main Street, perhaps Pleasant Street, wherever. I just don't want anyone to think that, from those places, to think that the city's only looking at Scenic Road as being a place that should be sensitive to unwanted noise at whatever time of day. That's all. Thank you.
Fair enough.
Anyone else wish to address the council on a matter that is on tonight's agenda? Welcome.
I'm Jane Davis, and I'm on Heritage, and I do thank John for his help. I just would like to say that I'm a retired teacher, and when I went to buy the house on Heritage, I actually went into the city hall. I have a terrible memory, but I went into the city hall, I spoke to a woman, and I said, as a retired educator, I cannot buy a home on a private road. I can't afford it. And she assured me, she looked at a book, she looked at a code, she looked at the street, and she said, the city will maintain your road. You do not have to worry. I'm not an attorney, and I didn't get a photocopy of any of that, and I know it's just my word, but I felt I wanted to be heard and share that with you. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we're going to move on then to the city manager's report. Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So included in your packet for our first meeting of the month, you have the update of the financial and operational trends. Again, we are now completed 2 months into our new fiscal year, so a lot of the numbers have rolled over and are new, so we're seeing early trends, but not a whole lot of data to go forward on yet. So the assessment numbers you can see on the assessing year beginning April 1 are up about $700 million where we were a year ago, which is at a slow and steady pace, not where we were 2 years ago at 12.3 million. We're currently at 7.9 million. You can see the fire and rescue calls on the page 1 and the police calls on the second page. I'll take any questions on those that you may have. Bottom of page 2, the property tax collection, again in a solid position. Same thing with motor vehicles being 2 months into the year, so nothing out of the ordinary, and those numbers are looking solid. Through overtime on page 3 with all departments, again, everything trending normally and nothing there to bring to your attention there either. I'd like to skip to page 5. Boat taxes, you'll notice that we're actually, if you look at the prior years, we're typically through August, we're anywhere from 10 to 15% of budget. This year, we're at 30% of budget. I'll back up to 2019. We did meet our revenue projection of $85,000 and it exceeded it by a few $1,000s. Fast forward to fiscal year 2020. Glenn Smith, our finance director, has informed me that the state has changed the method of how they are recording boat registrations that come from the boat dealer, so not the activity that happens in City Hall, which is recorded daily. In past forms, the boat dealers had to separate out by date or month wherever the collection came. Now when they're running a batch, I think is the terminology used, it just runs the numbers of registrations they've done and doesn't break it down by the month. So in the past, the finance department would have charged some of those registrations back to June for the prior fiscal year, and going forward now with just these state batches, we don't know which fiscal year they applied to. So without knowing, we're just lumping them into the current fiscal year, and that will be our policy going forward. So we are running at 30%, but again, we did hit our target last year. So the dollars haven't changed, it's just which fiscal year they're falling into, and we didn't have a good way to make an educated guess. So we've just shifted this out to be our approach going forward, and then we ought to be comparing apples and apples for years to come afterwards. So just wanted to bring that to your attention. I want to spend a few minutes on the EMS billing as we do, and I'd like to start on the last page of the report, which is the expense. I believe when we looked at this last month, we were wrapping up fiscal year June. We said there might be a few straggling bills out there, and I want to say the expense number was around $920,000 when we looked at it a month ago. We pretty much wrapped it up at $931,000. What changed between last month and this month? Basically, the medical supply line. We had a few invoices that came in that were attributable to the prior fiscal year. And then also the fourth line up from the bottom, the billing and collection expense, that's a reflection of a percentage of revenue collected, so that will go up as we collect more money. So that's really what drove the $10,000 change. If we go back a page to page 5, and you look at the final numbers, or final as we have them right now, we've collected $919,000 in the revenue, and that's up about $30,000 from where we were in last month. I can tell you that in every individual collection month, 10 out of the 12 months showed increases. So even going back to last July, a year ago July, and a year ago August, we are still seeing some of the collection. Now, granted, some of those numbers aren't huge, but it might be somebody who's on a payment schedule of $100 a month or something like that. But anyway, $30,000 in additional revenue attributable to the prior fiscal year has come in. If you put that with a revenue that doesn't show up in this chart that goes for the EMS and paramedic training that we now run in-house and bring in revenue from outside departments who send their folks to get recertified, that was about $10,000, and that also in that revenue number here doesn't include the couple $1,000s we've collected from the collection agency who's going after the delinquent accounts where they haven't responded to us. So that's a long way of saying that at this point where we stand right now, our revenue has exceeded what we expect to believe to be our final numbers for that. And even if you look at the June number where we've only collected at 52% right now, history shows us, as you go up the page, that that number should trend to be collected at 66%, 65%, somewhere in that range. So we aren't through with the collection side of it. We're basically through with the expense side, except for that 5.5%, which gets paid to the collection agency for doing that. So continues to trend positively. We've got to pick a date, and I haven't even asked Glenn this as to what date, but at some time, we've got to close the books on fiscal year 19 for the auditing purposes. We can still kind of track it this way for our own informational purposes, but at some point, we're gonna close the books, and as revenue comes in, it'll reflect in a different fiscal year. So, happy to stop there and take any questions on EMS billing or revenue.
Counselor Bounds.
Just on a general basis, we're still running in the red with respect to our ambulance expenses, are we not?
No, I mean, on paper today, we're 10,000 short, but the 919,000 in revenue doesn't include the 10,000 in revenue for the training courses we offered, and doesn't include the couple $1,000s that shows up in a different report from the collection agency. So right now, our revenue is in excess of 930,000. And if you wait for the June number at a minimum to run out to its full potential in that mid-60% range, I continue to remain confident that we will be
Running
to
in the
positive.
black?
Running to the black, yes. I think we're in the black today.
So, when do you expect to close the books and we get a final report of black or red? That's all I'm interested in.
The audit,
Within the next month, and probably quite a bit before that.
Okay.
Yeah, we're close. I mean, the auditors are here starting to do that. We're in September now. We've got to. We can continue to kind of track this internally just as an FYI. But we're in the black today. Not by much, by a couple thousand, but we're in the black. And realistically, the only expense that would continue to increase on fiscal year 19 would be the collection percentage that the billing company gets,
So-
that 5.5%. So that number is only going to be up if they're collecting additional funds.
So by the second meeting by the second meeting in October, we should be fairly certain of where we finished fiscal year 19, right?
We will have fiscal year 2019 money trickling in for the next 12 months. But I can tell you today we'll be in the black, and I can tell you in October we'll be in the black, but we can update that number for you.
we're accounting for stuff on a cash basis, in other words, and other methods would be an accrual basis. They would make an ultimate estimate. I think we'll have an audit report which will give us the final number whenever that's presented to us.
Right.
Thank you, Henry.
Any other questions for the city manager?
Is that the end of your?
I've got one other item that's not included in that report, but if you had a question on
Yeah,
the report.
quick question, Scott. On page 4, the tax incrementing financing balance for the Weirs. I believe last month that was quite a negative figure there, and now it's a $500 plus on that $4 million and what they were going to pay on that.
I'm
So just-
assuming-
Was there a payment that came in and?
Well, I'm assuming when we adopted the budget in July, that there were dollar amounts that were transferred to the various TIF districts at that point after budget adoption, so those probably hit the books in August, which would be reflected there. And then in the particular situation, actually two of the TIFs, the downtown TIF and the Weirs TIF, are responsible for a percentage of bond payments.
Correct.
So then those would be transferred over to have those do that. We are still carrying, for the Weirs in particular, we are still carrying a deficit, as we knew when we put the pro forma together, for about the first, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years off the top of my head. And Glenn and I actually discussed this a couple of weeks ago, with him being relatively new and not being part of that conversation, and brought that to my attention. And we actually pulled up the original pro forma and said, we're pretty much on track, or actually a little bit better than we thought we would be. We knew we were going to kind of peak at about $150,000 that the Weirs TIF would owe the general fund before their revenue exceeded, and then they would be able to pay for their portion of the debt service and start to repay the general fund. So we were actually a little bit better than our estimates, but that's probably what's reflected there with the
So you're
budget
saying
line.
that the TIF contribution is paying for the interest and principal plus is that left over?
Not quite yet. They're not quite paying the debt service. But we're a little bit less in the red than we projected to be at that time.
Yeah.
Not a huge amount, but where we've anticipated the growth in the value in that district and where we are right now, we're to the good by a little bit, so,
So this number will go back into the red when we make further payments?
yes.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Also, while we're on the weirs, have you got a schedule or a plan of when we're gonna fix the brickwork that sank in the sidewalks that have cracked? And now there's, I guess there's some sinkholes up there by the drainage, the drainage, surface drainage piping.
Let me get with the Public Works staff, and I will get you a report in writing before the next meeting.
Okay,
Where's that?
up at the weirs.
Near the community center?
No, on Lakeside Ave.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Is this something that he's already covered?
Yes, I wanted to talk a moment about overtime.
Go ahead.
I wonder, Mr. Manager, if we could get an overtime report that compares apples to apples. I think the fire department does a pretty substantial job of outlining sick and personal time and vacation, et cetera, extra duty, holiday pay, and then the police department says overtime. And I wonder if we could get all the departments to break it down. I mean, I understand nobody else does striping, so Public Works is going to have that as a different line, but certainly sick, hurt, personal time, vacation, extra duty, and holiday pay should be in every department, I believe.
I will work with Glenn to work with appropriate folks at police to add some detail to that.
Well, but I'd like to see it for, throughout the city, Public Works and others. I mean, Public Works breaks down an awful lot of overtime, but they don't mention sick leave and they don't mention holiday pay, and I think I saw holiday, no, there's no holiday pay in there.
Typically, that's something that's being paid contractually, and we're not necessarily filling those shifts with overtime. It's just we're down an employee on that given day.
And I guess what I'm saying is, I'd like to see 0 indicating that they're not doing that,
Okay.
all right?
I think some of the, I don't want to call it confusion, but what was left off is when it was on this report, you had fire, and then you had ambulance there, and the ambulance was taken off, and it
Oh,
was.
it's there.
It's on the bottom of the report,
EMS.
Oh, okay.
because it's its own standalone
All right. Yep.
account
Yep,
now.
I'm wrong. Yep, you're right. Okay.
Before it was part of the fire
Yeah, I was just
budget,
gonna
and
say
now
if it
it's
could be
separate.
brought back to this format, but I see it's already on there, so that's good. Okay.
All right, Mr. Myers, we're back to you for your final.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last thing, staff held a special events review committee meeting this morning for the event happening on September 21st, closing down Union Ave. And again, we had strong representation from fire, police, Public Works, the land use folks in the planning and the zoning end of it, Parks and Recreation. I attended, I think that covers it. We probably had a dozen city staff in the room and a lot of decision makers. So a very good update. There has been some good progress made since the original meeting and since this council approved the traffic order. At this point, we feel confident that they are crossing things off of the list and have key commitments from areas for parking, for use of some surface parking area within the event area itself from a couple of businesses where they're going to be using it for food vendors and the porta potties and those types of things in there, the support type of items. So there are still a couple of items that are outstanding and we're waiting to see some contracts and some final details on. We did firm up the hours of the event today, finalized that this is going to be the location on Union Ave, and the answer was yes to both of those. So the police department now will be putting together final numbers based on road closures and police details needed because it's been cemented. There had been some talk about maybe doing it in a location that wasn't on a city street, which would have changed how we planned for it and how we staffed for it. But we were told today that it is happening there in front of the store at 777 Union Ave. And so Chief Canfield will be working on final numbers that he'll be getting over to the event folks at the end of this week. And they have committed to us, and I asked the question and heard it, they will have escrowed funds with the city by Tuesday of next week. So they'll have all the final numbers they need on Friday of this week, and we will have escrowed funds with us on Tuesday of next week. So staff and I are comfortable that we're in a good place. It's not 100% done, but there's good effort being made, and we feel comfortable that the items that remain to be fine-tuned aren't going to happen.
Any further questions or comments for the city manager?
What if the escrow funds don't show up?
There will be no event.
Okay. So we
At
had
least not on the
experience
street.
We had experience with that, so.
Anyone else? Okay, we're going to move on to new business then. First item of new business is a request to update the city's ordinances on obstructing sidewalks and parking fines. Are you going to take that?
Yeah, I'll do this. So we've got the two things the mayor just mentioned, obstructing sidewalks and parking fines are in two different sections of our ordinance. You can see the numbers there. It made sense to write one staff report since they are kind of interrelated. You can see under one of the recommendations is that we update the language for the sidewalk parking. We're going to strike the part that it shall be guilty of violations punishable by a fine of not more than $500 or imprisonment for not more than 90 days. We thought that was a little bit extreme. So we're backing off that and going into it being a standalone parking fine in the other section there. So that's the one significant change under Ordinance 201-13. So we're not going to be imprisoning. And then the other one under 221-47, we basically updated a couple of the minor infraction fines from their current level of $10 to bring them to $15, just as a little more of an enticement of people complying. One of them deals with a parking violation. It was brought to the point that if you were parking in Weirs Beach, it's cheaper to pay a $10 parking ticket than to put money in the meter for 6 or 7 hours type of thing. So there are 4 fines basically dealing with parking on the street from midnight to sunrise, the winter parking hours, the parking violations at the kiosk are going from $10 to $15 in the second ordinance. So you do have 2 separate sets of motions and votes to move them to the public hearings tonight, but since they were interrelated, we did it in one staff report for you.
So we are being asked to approve this on first reading tonight, refer it to both initiatives to public hearings at our next meeting. Honorable will speak even at the next meeting. Questions or comments before we get to motions?
I just have a
Counselor
question. How long has it been on the books that we could throw somebody in jail for a parking violation?
I think the answer to put it in the mayor's term, since you, the city, put that on there. It wasn't staff who did that.
Now you're going to be soft on crime.
You see that parking scofflaw over there?
Counselor Cheney.
I'm trying to understand, parking 9 to 6:30 in the morning snow removal is a $15 fine, but left wheel to curb is $25. And I would think I'd reverse those if it was me.
You can offer up amendments once this goes through and you
I
take
would-
action on it, so.
I would strongly recommend the snow removal be increased to 25, and
What page are you on, Counselor?
what page am I on?
You're
Mr.
at
Manager.
page 30 of it. So for that one in particular, so that's on the page 30, the third item under the violation. That's basically ties into the no parking on the street in winter. It's not a situation where somebody ignored a declared state of emergency and they were there while we were actively plowing the snow. We've got the ordinance that, so it could be November 5th. The way our ordinance reads, there's no on-street parking from November 1st until, I believe it's April 30th? I don't think it's May 30. I think that's a little late. That's after Memorial Day. Anyway, November 1st to somewhere in the spring, if there's not a snowflake to be seen, but technically there is no parking, on the street. So that's what that one deals with, not so much in an emergency. If we had a vehicle out there that was hindering plowing operations, and we couldn't contact the owner, as we try to do with a courtesy through the police department, we're towing that vehicle out of there. They're getting a ticket, they're paying the towing charge if they're impacting the operation. So that's strictly for that blanket
Counselor, you'd like to see that
November 1st.
$25?
I would.
All right, so we'll put that in the form of an amendment in a minute.
Do we need to amend it tonight?
I'm sorry?
Do we need to amend it
Yeah,
tonight?
we'll rent it on first reading tonight, so that when it goes to second reading and our public hearing, it'll be on the amended amount. I don't know for a fact you're gonna vote for it, but if the majority wants that change, we'll do it tonight.
I'm not sure where you are, because I don't have page numbers here. Show me.
Who wants to change the chain to fine for violating park between 9 PM to 6 AM for the snow
6 a.m.
period from $10 to $25.
Parking during no parking period.
All right, any other comment or suggestion? Counselor Haynes?
Scott, is there a rationale behind the $15?
Some of it tied to what we're charging for the kiosk right now. So in Weirs Beach, so you're talking about going on the parking violation?
Yeah.
So if someone doesn't choose to feed the meter, at the beach, a ticket's $10. Well, if they stay there parked all day and only get one ticket, they would have had to put, $15 or $20 in to park all day at the beach. Someone might choose to do that versus, pay a $10 ticket versus feeding the meter. So it was just tried to put to try to have it parallel a little bit as to what the cost of the
Suggesting
meters
it's too
were.
low?
No, I'd like to suggest that everything is 25. I think $15 is pocket change to some of these people. And I'd like to see a stricter enforcement, and I think that might get their attention.
It could, and I also, sometimes there are such, circumstances, especially on an expired meter, where somebody missed it by a little bit. We did look at some other communities that do paid parking, Dover, Portsmouth, Concord, I forget, and most of their fees, some were at 25, others were at 15. So, we tried not to be too heavy-handed in our approach, but make it have a little bit more sting. But we're open, to be honest with you.
Accept that as an amendment in due time if you want to make it.
Thank you.
To be honest with you, Public Works did recommend going to 25, and I went,
It's high compared to some other communities.
for,
He has a
Anyway.
higher empathy quotient than our public works does.
the kindler,
We won't go into why.
kindler, gentler.
Well,
We can do it in increments.
Yeah.
Are any other questions or comments before we get to making motions? All right. So both of those comments tonight had to do with the first set of motions, right?
The second one
the
under
second one.
221, yes.
Second one, okay. All right, so the first order of business would be to move to waive a reading of ordinance 2019-201-13 in its entirety and to read tonight by title only. Counselor Hosmer makes that motion, Counselor Cheney seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. Next up would be a move to pass on first reading ordinance 13 relative to amending Chapter 201 Streets and Sidewalks. Motion made by Counselor Hosmer, seconded by Counselor Bounds. Any discussion? All those in favor of first reading, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. And finally, a motion would be in order to schedule a public hearing for ordinance 2019-201-13 during the regular council meeting on September 23rd, 2019, to gather public input prior to adoption. Counselor Hosmer makes that motion. Counselor Bond seconds it. All those in favor of, first of all, any discussion? All those in favor of scheduling a public hearing, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries, and the hearing has been scheduled. Okay, now, bear with me on this one. First up is a motion would be in order to waive a reading of ordinance 47 in its entirety and to read tonight by title only. Counselor Hosmer makes that motion. Counselor Bound seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor of reading by title only, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. Okay, now we need to get on the floor. A motion to waive a reading of ordinance 40, I'm sorry, to move first reading of ordinance 47 relative to amending chapter 221 vehicles and traffic. Counselor Hosmer makes that motion, Counselor Bound seconds it. All right, so now we have that motion on the floor. So what I'm going to suggest next, we don't have to do it this way, is that we accept consideration of Counselor Haynes's amendment first, because it would cover yours. If it doesn't pass, we can come back to yours. All right, so Counselor Haynes moves on page 30 of the resolution 47 to change all numbers that are recommended for $15 to $25, correct?
Yes.
Second.
That motion is seconded by Counselor Cheney. All right, we're discussing now to amend this, all references of $15 to $25. Discussion. Counselor Lippman.
I think compared to other communities, it's too high for certain violations, particularly as the manager talked about missing a meter time. So I can't support that.
Counselor Bounds.
I can't support it either, you know. We're not gonna generate any revenues, any additional revenues that are gonna make a difference, number one. Number two, it will make a difference to individual people. And number three, we ought to stay in step with what other communities are doing. This isn't just about, oh, let's raise the fine $10. That might hurt some people in some ways for really innocent behavior and in that situation. So I think we stick at the 15. That's my 2 cents.
If I may, I
Counselor
think it's
Cheney.
unfair to suggest that the manager said all the other communities are at $15. That's not what he said.
I didn't
That's-
suggest that. I didn't.
Well,
I
you
didn't- I
certainly
didn't care.
implied that we should be like like all other communities. And I just, you know, this is an area where we can get somebody's attention if it's a problem. Discretion is allowed. Unless things have changed dramatically at the police department, people march in the police headquarters every day of the week and bitch about a ticket. And as many times as not, they get voided because they have an explanation. But for those times when people are willfully ignoring our ordinances, I think $25 is appropriate. Thank you.
Anyone else? Counselor Haynes.
I wasn't looking to raise revenue. I guess I've had an opportunity to ride up and down the streets of Laconia first thing in the morning.
Me
And
too.
there are so many gross violations of people parked on the sidewalk. You can't even, you'd have to walk on their lawns to get, if you wanted to walk on the side. And I guess my point is,
that's an
I'm just trying
enforcement-
that people take serious that they can't park on the sidewalks and they can't do certain things.
Well, I don't think increasing the fine by $10 is doing that. Enforcement's really
Okay,
the issue.
I just,
Counselor Haynes has the floor.
Excuse me.
I'm fine.
Counselor Lippman.
So if I'm hearing you right, the type of situation you talked about is different than someone having expired meter and charging
Exactly.
$25. But you were originally proposing that even that be $25.
No, I understand that. That could happen to any of us. But these gross violations have
Yeah,
got to
no,
stop.
I mean, that aspect of it I could support, not just sort of you miss putting,
No, I understand. That could happen to any of us.
Any further discussion?
But do I understand you're amending your motion
As far
to
as-
eliminate parking meter violations at 25?
Yes, I would.
And I'd second
So
that.
now you're amending your amendment? So I guess we can consider that a friendly
I'm
amendment.
hoping.
I don't see a parking meter violation here.
Overtime parking is what's
Overtime
referred to. So
parking,
the overtime
okay.
parking would stay at the 15 as it
All
is,
right.
and the
Is
amended
that
motion.
change okay with you,
It
Counselor
is.
Cheney? All right, so what are we doing now? Overtime parking would stay at $15, all the rest would go to 25?
The other three that are slated to go to 15 would go to 25, yes, that's my understanding.
All right. All right, so we have a friendly amendment, Madam Clerk. And so the motion on the floor now is to amend ordinance 47 as presented tonight so that the fine for overtime parking would remain at the suggested $15. But all other references to $15 on the fine scale would change to $25.
That's correct.
Correct? Okay, further discussion. All right, so we're going to vote on the amendment now. All right, all those in favor of Counselor Haynes' amendment, please raise a hand. Did you? All those opposed, please raise a hand. We have 4 votes yes, 2 votes no. Motion carries 4-2. All right, so the main motion has now been amended. And we are back to discussion about passing this ordinance 47 on its first reading. Everybody got that? So we have an amended motion now. So we're voting on the first reading of this amendment, of this ordinance as amended. All right, any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. All those opposed, please raise a hand. We have 4 votes yes, 2 votes no. The motion carries on first reading. And finally, a motion to be in order to schedule a public hearing for ordinance 47 during the regular council meeting on September 23rd to gather public input prior to adoption. I have that motion, please. Councilor Bounds makes the motion, seconded by Councilor Haynes. All those in favor of scheduling a public hearing on Resolution 47 as amended, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, next up is resident request for a 4-way stop sign at the intersection of Sheridan and School Streets. You have a memorandum in your packet on page 32, and I believe the recommendation from the Public Works Department, if I recall, is to put 1 stop sign at the end of the stub of School Street. Do I have that correct? Okay. In other words, there'd be, rather than 2 stop signs going either direction on School Street, there would be 1 at the stub, which runs down to the lake. All right, any discussion or questions? We typically table these to see if there's any public comment on them.
Yes.
Would you like to make a motion to table it?
Make
Counselor
that motion.
Lippman?
I'll second.
Counselor Lippman makes a motion to table this table this presentation so that people who live in that area can have a couple of weeks to comment on it to us if they like. All right, so the proposal to state once again is, and this was at the suggestion of a resident in that neighborhood who wanted stop signs on Sheridan Street and School Street at that 4-way intersection, all 4 stop signs. And the recommendation from the Department of Public Works is to put up 1 stop sign on School Street coming off of the stub that runs down to the lake. All right, so we had a motion by Councilor Lippman, somebody seconded.
I seconded.
Councilor Haynes seconded. All right, we're voting now to table this to the next meeting. All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. Finally, under new business, we have a request from the Parks and Rec Department to utilize non-capital reserve funds for the replacement of the paved entrance walkway and sidewalk. What's missing is the words at the Weirs Community Center. So this has to do with the Weirs Community Center.
Yeah.
All right. Ms. Levizik, are you covering this tonight?
Good evening. So basically what I'm looking to do is there's a walkway in the main entrance for the Weirs Community Center, along with the sidewalk there that we put into, that abuts the parking lot that was recently put in, all right, recent, 12 years ago. The sidewalk and the walkway have deteriorated significantly. There are frost heaves, there are dips, and all kinds of unsafe situations going on there. What I'm looking for is a little bit over $10,000. The total price for it that I got from Busby Construction was $35,600. And then the Weirs Community Park Association put in $17,500. So they were willing to pay half of that, which was very generous of them. And also, when looking this up, you all made this motion last year in June to fix this area, and apparently it didn't get done. So you already put in $8,000 in non-capital reserve fund. So technically, I'm looking for a little over $10,000 right now to accomplish this.
Was that carried forward?
I believe it was carried forward. I think that was an estimate at the time. We didn't have a back-of-the-envelope estimate. We hadn't gone out and gotten actual bid prices, so the bid came in higher than the back-of-the-envelope estimate, but yes.
So we only need the incremental amount to get us to 10, not 10 more.
The vote is still valid for the 8. Obviously, we haven't done the project, so those funds haven't been transferred out of the non-cap reserve, but we just need to vote the additional 10 because the vote for the first 8 is still valid.
And just to be on the up and up, when I spoke with Busby this afternoon, it would not be able to be accomplished this fall. I wish it was, but they are busy.
Well, if you go out to bid, it could be somebody else.
It could be.
So we voted last year to take $8,000 out of non-capital reserve for this project, and it just never happened.
Correct.
So that $8,000 is just still sitting there.
Still sitting in the non-cap reserve account.
And now she's asking for another $10,200.
Yes.
Is that an additional 10,200 on top of the 8?
Correct.
And
Total project was around $35,000, and the Weirs Community Center was putting up roughly half of it.
Okay.
So where do we stand on actually bidding the projects?
Stand on bidding this particular project?
Has it been bid?
I don't know if it's, I think we've got an estimate on it.
We
but
just
it-
got the estimate
but-
from Busby.
So that's the estimated number. We will go out to bid and follow the city's bidding procedures on this because it meets that dollar threshold.
Right.
So, but
Why
this
not
won't be
wait?
done until the next season of construction.
Well, if another company can do it, then, and they can do it this year, then it's possible.
Why don't we put that in our specifications? Our bid specifications of a time frame for when it gets done, and then, once you've bid it, we can come back and give you the amount you need. I mean, I think, I don't know, speaking for other counselors, but I'm in support of fixing the sidewalk. Let's get it done.
I am too,
Let's-
but what's the element?
My suggestion is include in your bid element, our bid element, that the construction be completed within a certain time frame.
That's fair enough.
By
And then-
fall.
By whatever date, October, or whatever, we don't want to go too late with
Right.
asphalt because.
Are you talking about fall this year, October this year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then just approve the amount that's needed to accomplish that.
I agree.
So do it this year.
Counselor Haynes, did you have a question?
That'd be
Amy,
great.
just a quick question. Is there a drainage problem?
There is a drainage problem.
So
When it
we'd
was
look
put
to-
in, there's 2 retaining walls going into the building itself. And as you're walking into the building, the one on the left, it doesn't have the drain that it really needs, and it's a clay area.
Okay.
And so it's going underneath the walkway, and the plan would be to remove that retaining wall and slope it, and still put the drainage, so we don't have that problem again.
That's fine. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, a motion be in order.
Can we just have a sentiment that we're going to make the adjustment to the $8,000 that we've previously approved from the non-capital reserve fund based on the bid so that the project can be done before this paving season is done? I mean, it seems silly to take a vote on a dollar figure we don't know.
Well, couldn't we make a motion that up to a certain dollar amount in the motion, but the element
Yes,
of it
I'd
being.
rather, I think we'd get a better bid if we don't approve the amount in advance.
So why don't we just not do anything until she comes back with us?
So if you just give it consensus that, yes, this is a project that we're interested in moving forward, and let's go out to bid and
Yeah.
put an aggressive time frame to have it
We're
done
not
this
gonna
year.
make a motion, we're just gonna say, yes, we lean toward approval of this, but let's get a solid bids before we,
And a time frame.
I will definitely do that.
okay?
Thank you very much.
Just one point to throw out, not saying that we can't make that time frame. You may limit the number of bids that you get if people are busy and we're already coming up to mid-September and we want something done by the end of October, 1st of November, you could limit response from somebody not
either
having to do it.
this fall or
Okay,
next
I just
spring.
want to make you aware of that if someone,
Right, but it
let's see what
seems,
we
it seems
get.
like
We got
we've got
nothing to
Busby
lose.
Yeah.
to do the job anyway by next spring, I would suspect, so I mean, that's in our back pocket, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm hearing, though, is a significant safety concern at the current moment.
At this point,
I had an opportunity to go with the director there. I think we do have some liability
So the-
associated with the condition of the whole
Getting
walkway.
it done is cheaper than paying a claim on someone getting hurt.
we will get it bid as soon as possible with
Right.
this fall completion date.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
All right, we're on to unfinished business. 2 items tonight. The first is second reading and approval of bonding to finance the repair and restoration of the historic Colonial Theater. That is on page 34 of your packet. Actually, the resolution itself is on page 36. And as I said, this is, earlier, this is a matter of routine, so we need to we need 4 different motions tonight, is that correct? Not 3, but 4.
I count 4.
I think 4th was a reaffirmation thing or
That
something.
was rescind the prior one.
To rescind the prior one.
Oh, okay. All right. Any questions on this before we get to motions? All right, first motion in order would be to waive reading of resolution number 21 in its entirety and to refer to it tonight by title only.
So moved.
Counselor Bounds makes a motion, Counselor Lippman seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, reading by title only, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. Second up is to move to approve the second reading of Resolution 21, a resolution relative to authorizing the city manager to take any actions necessary to issue bonds for the repair and restoration of the historic Colonial Theater in the amount of $6.7 million. Counselor Hamel makes that motion. Counselor Hosmer seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving on second reading, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. Next up is to move to approve Resolution 21, final vote on Resolution 21, a resolution relative to the issuance of a bond to finance the repair and restoration of the historic Colonial Theater in the amount of $6.7 million. Why does it say to gather public input prior to adoption?
It shouldn't, that should be stricken. That was from a first reading.
Thank you. So I'll read that again. A motion to approve Resolution 21, a resolution relative to the issuance of a bond to finance the repair and restoration of the historic Colonial Theater in the amount of $6,700,000. Can I have that? Counselor Bounds makes a motion, Counselor Haynes seconds it. All those in favor of final reading, please raise a hand. 6 votes in affirmative. That motion carries unanimously. And lastly, a motion be in order to rescind a Resolution 19 that was approved by council on July 22, 2019, relative to the issuance of a bond to finance the repair and restoration of the historic Colonial Theater. Counselor Bounds makes that motion, seconded by Counselor Hosmer. Any discussion? All those in favor of rescinding Resolution 19, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries unanimously. Don't want to hex anything, but hopefully that'll be the the last time we again have to pass those resolutions. All right, last order of business tonight is private roads that do not meet the city's criteria for accepting a road, quote, as is, end quote. Mr. Anderson.
On May 13th of this year, the City Council adopted the standards or the criteria that we were going to use for accepting roads as an as-is condition. As part of that, we had to go through and look at those roads that were private roads that we've been maintaining to some degree over the years and determine what to do with those for the ones who did not meet the criteria. This presentation tonight is on those roads. When we developed and looked at it, we came up with a series of 3 recommendations. One is for those roads that we stop providing public works services. We've proposed an initial date of June 30th, 2020, and we'll talk more of that later. Those that we're going to retain is either emergency lanes or we're going to designate as emergency lanes, and 3 that require more investigation. Excuse me. Okay, so the ones that we're proposing to stop providing public works services are Colonial Road and Plantation Road. Mainly disservice to the abutters and hazard to downhill residents, mainly due to the lack of the drainage system that's there, and basically the steepness of the roads and the lack of drainage that causes more of a problem due to the steepness. That historically has had problems with the erosion, taking the sediment, running it across Endicott Street East, and in certain heavy rainstorms, it's even gone into the condominium association that's across the street. The next one is Hadley Road. That's a dead end off the Severance. If you're going,
We take
yes.
questions on,
Yes.
if I heard right from the gentleman who spoke earlier this evening, the resident, so for 40 years, we've been providing that service. How, can you describe it more about the hazard that's entailed here? I don't, not quite following what the hazard is.
If you go out there, there is no drainage system on those roads. The road is the drainage system. So every time it rains hard.
Those 2 roads.
Those 2 roads. There are no drainage systems on those roads. In certain places, we have and we shouldn't have. We have done turnouts where we've sent the water under private property. And because we didn't have permission to do it, we really shouldn't have done it. That is the only drainage system in that area. All the rest of the roads flow down towards the center part of Colonial and then head straight towards Endicott Street East. If you go out there now, we have basically a berm from all the erosion that's come down that we've built up to a degree that sort of enables us to direct the water that's coming down into the only pipe that goes underneath Endicott Street East. And then goes from there across country to get to Lake Winnipesaukee where it eventually drains out. So there really isn't a drainage system there. It just happens to get to that one culvert. After about every heavy rainstorm, we have to go up. We've got to regrade it, York rake it, wait till, in some cases, we have to wait till it dries, and then we've got to scrape off the lower paved platform such that the traffic doesn't spin out on the sand before it tries to get on Endicott Street East.
I had Counselor Cheney first.
I thought I understood the gentleman to suggest that there is an abutter who's willing to give you some room for a drain.
All that does is it gives you the ability to meet what the current standards are. You still got to get the water to it. So that means you're still going to have to put a piping system of some sort to collect the water from the various points to get it to that stormwater retention/detention pond.
So a ditch wouldn't do that?
No, still at some point you're going to go through, because if it's in the wrong spot, you're going to have to redirect the water underground to get to that spot. There is no ditch, there is no ability, to easily put a ditch unless you narrow the road.
So,
Counselor Cheney, or Counselor Hosmer, I'm sorry, was next.
Thank you. What has the city been doing besides some of that maintenance of the road and creating a little bit of a culvert for a runoff there?
Basically, we've been plowing in the wintertime, sanding it because it's a gravel road. We don't salt it any. And then in the springtime during the mud season, right after it gets out, we'll grade it once. And then every time it has a bad rainstorm, we have to go back up and either York rake it, grade it, or sometimes bring in some gravel. But that also means we have to go out and we have to clean off that bottom pad and stock it's really sand at that point off to the side.
Any sense of how long, how many years we've been doing that type of work on those roads?
What I can tell you from what research I've done on it is, and we probably picked up plowing it in 1977. That's when the city council at that time informally directed Public Works to keep plowing those private roads that had permanent residents on it. There is no other records in the files of when we started doing anything else to those roads.
Counselor, are you
I am, yeah,
finished?
thank you.
Counselor Littman?
So how will the hazard be discontinued by the discontinuation of service?
It isn't. The problem comes in is we're assuming liability at this point. And one, it's a private road, we can't assume liability. So it needs to go back onto the private road residents. And the other piece to it is if we don't determine what we want to do now, forget inflation, as costs go forward and rules and regulations change in regards to stormwater, the cost of doing something increases.
But I guess the hazard you're identifying is going to continue to happen.
Correct.
And only get worse because we're not having any participation there, is what I'm hearing.
Or is your intent to force them to participate?
To put it this way, it's in their best interest to do it now at the cost that is than it is in the future when the costs are going to go up. Forgetting inflation, just the change in regulations in regards to stormwater.
So what's the cost?
We never did a full estimate, but we did an estimate for the sanitary sewer system, which is going to be somewhat compatible, and that was about 1.2 million. So just to put in a stormwater drainage system in there, you're probably talking something between 1 to 1.5 million.
How many houses?
You have, again, a lot of it's undeveloped, so it really depends on what the city council decides to do. You could have upwards of about 89 to 100 lots that you could be spreading those costs across.
How many houses are there now?
I'd have to sit and count.
We think we need to do that.
Is it 10 or are we?
No, but if you're doing a betterment right now, and we'll talk that piece, it's not just how many houses are there now, it's how many buildable lots are there. So a lot of it will depend upon what the council will decide in the future in regards to
Who
how.
owns the lots? The
Pardon?
original developer?
Original developer sold it to another developer, who then sold it to a third party who owns a little over 21 acres in the back, and the property's back up for sale again.
Did they buy it with the intent of developing it?
No, they bought it in intent with subdividing and making it 2 separate lots for a family compound,
The 21 acres.
the 21 acres.
Didn't we just do that not long ago?
Pardon?
Didn't we just do that not long ago on that piece of property?
No,
They come and ask to merge the lots or something?
No, that was a different piece, that was a different
It's
parcel.
on that, up in there, right?
That was up in that parcel.
Okay.
That was on Colonial.
All right, for the immediate, we can come back to this, but for moving along, are we through with the immediate questions about Colonial and Plantation
For the moment.
for the moment? All right, so you're gonna move on to Hadley Road now?
Hadley Road is the dead-end road at the end of Severance. It basically leads up to the Volpe property, where he has his airstrip. That basically,
Out north of Southdown?
pardon?
Out north of Southdown?
Correct. Basically, when he came forth, and don't quote me on the exact date on it, when he came forth to subdivide to make it into 2 lots, the planning board said that he had to bring the road up to standards, city standards, so the city could accept it. He didn't. Later on, staff said it didn't make sense for doing 2 lots, but he's known since then that's been private. And we have been basically plowing it and doing some minor maintenance to it, but I'm going to use an old Civil War terminology. It's a sunken road. Basically, the road's about 1.5 to 2 feet lower than the ground around it. So every time it rains hard, it floods a bit, and to help alleviate it to a degree, we've done some cuts where it can get through the buildup. But it's going to keep sinking over time as we grade it more.
And we're currently plowing it?
We're currently plowing it and doing minor maintenance to it.
All right, and the remaining 4 are all Christmas Island?
All Christmas Island, and when they went to build the lakes the condos at the lakes, the new development. Basically, they hired an attorney to determine what the status of the road was, to figure out what they had to do. And as part of that effort, the attorney determined that Prescott Ave was private. At that point, if the city council, the planning board wanted them to do something with it, that would have been the appropriate time to have them bring it up to standards to have it accepted by the city. The other roads that lead to Prescott Avenue, because their only access is on Prescott Avenue, if Prescott Avenue doesn't become a public road, they cannot become public roads.
And these 4 streets we've also are now plowing.
Correct. In particular, when you look at FR Section 2, that's a short dirt road, and we're basically plowing someone's driveway. Any questions on this before I go to the next one?
All right, so that's the first 7 roads, right?
Correct. Okay, the next ones are those to retain as emergency lanes. And you'll see there's 2 that we're recommending to be added as emergency lanes. Pendleton Beach, Boathouse, Channel Lane, and the crossover street between Addison and Durkee are already declared emergency lanes, so we're recommending that be retained as such. Pendleton Beach and Boathouse Road are limited winter-only emergency lanes, which basically means we just plow them. The others, we do enough maintenance so that we can get to our either pump station or use the crossover for emergency vehicles. The other one is, if you go to the other sheet, Bell Street from Franklin to Chapin Terrace is an old undeveloped road that we use during the wintertime when it's heavy snow to be able to cross from Chapin Terrace back up to Washington. So we're able to come through and make a sweep. That's about the only thing that we do to it. Then the other 2 that we're recommending to be emergency lanes is Hayes Road, which is the one by Fun Spot, and New Hope Drive, which is on White Oaks, which presently has a platted subdivision at the end. And every now and then, there is interest to take that subdivision and build it, in which case that developer would be expected to bring New Hope Road up to city standards as part of the project. And the last 3, we're asking for permission to do additional research. Blaisdell Avenue, we basically have to confirm where our border is between Guilford and the city. I highly suspect that the border is right where it turns into Irwin's Marine Storage Area, in which case it's immaterial at this point. We don't have any roads that really, we don't have a private road that belongs to the city there. It's all in Guilford. Lane Court is in the Lakeport area. That road is 1 lot deep. We suspect it's a private right-of-way for the landlocked house to the rear. We have several in the city, situations like that, where the only way to get to the house that's in the back is through someone else's property. And then Morgan Road is between Meredith Center Road and Parade. That is one where some of the evidence, it could either be a possible Class 6 road or a private road, and that is south of Pickerel Pond and north of Lane. If you're coming up Parade, you'll see some farmhouses on the left. It basically goes between the farmhouses and heads due west to link up with Meredith Center Road and about where that sharp turn is north of the transfer station.
You identify that as the Lakeport area?
No, that's Morgan Road. That's the last one. The Lane Court is in the Lakeport area.
So where is Lane Court again?
Lane Court, it's between Hill and Prospect, comes off a Cole, goes through one property, and then ends there basically at the house.
Okay.
Out in back of my house.
Yeah.
I knew you'd factor into this somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's
It's a matter of time before we
there
uncover
are
it.
6 other, there are 6 other situations like that I know about in the city where to get to the house, the landlocked house, you gotta go through someone else's property. One is the Dunkin' Donuts on South Main Street.
That's right.
You gotta go through there to get to the houses in the back.
That's right.
So it's not uncommon in the city, it's just not real common. So I suspect that's that's truly supposed to be a private right-of-way to get to that house. Subject to your questions, I'll go back to the first grouping.
I got a question, Wes.
Yes.
Boathouse Road, that was one of the ones that was discussed a little while ago. That was a private road with,
That is a private road. That is one where the covenants basically say that it cannot be ever accepted as a public way. The city council, I want to say last year, maybe about this time, just voted to not accept it, wrong term, voted to declare it an emergency lane, but a limited winter-only emergency lane. Basically, we just plow it. Everything else is their responsibility.
Right, and if you'll recall, we had never plowed Boathouse.
We never plowed
We
Boathouse.
had never plowed that road in the past.
Correct.
But that is the policy now, and that's not changing. So we're just identifying the ones that will remain
Yeah.
emergency lanes.
Right.
There's a couple of new ones we're recommending, and then the 3 at the end. So just one thing to kind of back up to the original staff report, if I can just jump in for a minute. The reason, these are our last challenging streets. Almost all the other ones, when the council voted to approve the accept as is, we took care of about 40 or so,
About 36 roughly.
36 streets of the 50 that were kind of in limbo. And we're working through that process. So once the city council adopted the criteria needed to accept a road as is, that's when we laid these over, and these several here that we're not recommending that we continue to maintain don't meet the criteria as accepted. So this was an exercise out of that criteria being accepted, and the remaining streets that we knew to be private were laid on top of that, and that's the recommendation. So it's just the next step in the process. But these, and I know there's some difficult discussions and decisions there, but these are the last ones of our really problem streets. I mean, the light, I believe, is at the end of the tunnel for what we know today with the streets that are in front of you tonight.
I have a question, if I might.
Sure, go ahead.
Morgan Road, I'm at a bit of a loss. Is that on that sharp turn?
Correct, and you can see
goes
sort
into-
of a trail going up.
And
That's
that
Morgan
comes
Road.
out in the, by the Stafford property on the other end, if I'm not
I
mistaken.
can't remember the name of the farmhouses, but it's south of Parsonage.
Yep,
And you'll see a series of 2 farmhouses on the left. And the driveway goes between the 2 farmhouses.
yeah, I think, yeah. So, if it's where I think, so if it becomes a possible Class 6, does that mean we have to start maintaining it
No, Class 6 just means we have a
right away?
right-of-way there that the city has accepted. We have no maintenance responsibilities for it.
Okay.
Just similar to what we have for the western portion of Hilliard Road. We have a right-of-way there, but we don't maintain it.
Okay.
Counselor Lippman.
I just go back to the couple roads in question that we've heard about tonight. I guess I still need to hear why it's in the city's interest to discontinue what we're doing for safety purposes, because the road's gonna deteriorate and get worse rather than,
You have the option then, if you so desire, is declare it as an emergency lane. That would legally put us in the position of being able to do some work to it. But it doesn't give us any of the liability associated with it, and it also doesn't solve their long-term problem. It just delays it. So at some point in the future, by that I mean the drainage problem still stinks. At some point in the future, we have to take action to correct the drainage problem. It goes back to the property owners again. And at that point, whatever rules and regulations, that are imposed upon us by either the federal or state will have to go, to that drainage system. So the cost could be much more than it is now.
Well, I'm thinking that I need to know more about Colonial Road and Plantation Road, how many folks were actively impacting by doing this, even though it's 2020 that we're not going to make it effective by. And I think that Councilor Lippman is right. By discontinuing it and stop providing public works services, we increase the hazard along that section.
You're correct in that, let me phrase that. Your hazard at the bottom of the hill doesn't change any.
Okay.
What happens is that there isn't a method to fix it at that point unless the homeowners within the Plantation and Colonial create a homeowners association and contracts to have it done.
And buy into a betterment.
At that point, it'd be just like a homeowners association paying for whatever work. Now, the simplest way I could explain it is Southtown and Long Bay. The homeowners association pays for everything there as regards to public works services. It's their own piece. So that homeowners association would have to pay for all the public works services if we.
So that's why I was asking how many homes there were.
Right.
Because if you're throwing out the number of $1.2 million, then the question becomes, how many pieces of the pie are there?
Back in, I want to say October of last year, we did a briefing, presentation to the members of that area who showed up to it. And I can pull those slides out and brief the council at the next one. But that's when we had all those numbers. And I want to say it was, using this, was roughly around $10,000 per household for around 10 years to pay off all the costs associated with bringing it up to city standards.
What was that again?
It was around 10,000, I want to say.
Per year, per household?
Correct.
Per year?
For 10 years. Right.
$100,000.
That means
But
there's
again-
about 12 houses there then.
But again, that depends upon how city council splits the shares of it across all the lots that are developed and undeveloped. And that's assumptions I can't make at that time. I can just tell you what the cost is versus,
Well, I guess I want to see that presentation that you.
more than happy to bring it.
Yeah. I need to see what.
Yeah, we did that presentation in October of last year.
Did you-
Weirs Community Center. And a lot of people attended.
Okay. We can do that again here, right?
Can probably have a bigger location.
Okay.
So I'm not asking for a decision at this point, but I am asking for guidance
Well,
to get us to that point.
For one, I don't think we're in a position
Right.
to make the decision because we don't have enough information, and certainly listening to the woman who testified earlier, I forget her name, the idea of displacing someone out of their house because we've got this issue, I think we need all the facts before we ever get to the point of making a decision on this. And I share other counselors' concerns that it doesn't solve,
Then,
walking away from what we've been doing on that doesn't make the situation any better. In fact, maybe exacerbates it.
then your only options at this point, if you want to protect the city, is if you do nothing, it's not, I'll say, formalized. If you want to do something to sort of keep our level of service going to some extent, then you need to start considering declaring it some form of emergency lane.
And does it
But
make-
again, that doesn't solve the long-term problem.
It doesn't, but I think we could probably perhaps make that decision on the 23rd, our next meeting.
Correct.
And we'd also have some additional information that you could provide as well. And we're still well ahead of the winter curve, if you will, if we decide to.
Again,
We're not
yes.
gonna stop this winter.
No.
We'll stop, so we're
Yeah,
gonna
this-
keep
This winter's,
providing
everything's taken
services.
care of. We're getting them through, well, no matter what we do, we know we gotta get them through a winter, and we gotta get them through a mud
On what
season.
basis would we declare it an emergency lane?
Because it's a hazard.
Well, it's,
Yeah.
eh,
Hubbada,
the simplest way to do it is to protect your fire trucks, ambulances, and
Right,
police
yeah.
vehicles. That's the only legal.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that you think the best long-term solution for everyone involved would be for the people who own homes and lots on those two streets to do a betterment, to put in a drainage system, and then have the city declare it in an emergency way, which would allow us to continue to plow it,
Correct.
even though it's a private street. Is that what you're saying?
I didn't hear that way. I heard it the opposite.
For
I
the
heard-
short term, if you want to keep providing those services, we'll say for 4 or 5 years, then we need to declare it an emergency lane, whether it's a limited winter only or the full emergency lane is immaterial. It's just really what services they get at that point. But again, that doesn't solve the long-term problem for the houses and residents, because it's still a private road. If someone comes up to ask me, about selling the property, I have to say it's a private road that has limited services for it. It doesn't change the status of the road.
Okay.
Why was nobody told that before?
Sir,
You started this a long time ago.
sir. You had something you wanted to say?
I was going to say, based on looking to provide some additional information on getting number of houses that are built and how many developable lots, we can pull out the presentation that I know I was at and Dean was at, and we did it on a Friday night last fall, so the people who were up for the weekend could make it. We did one for the Methodist campground, and on the next week, we did one for the neighbors. So we've definitely got those slides in doing that. We can get that to you. We can get you the numbers, and that way everyone's current with the information. I would encourage all of you to take a drive out there and go slow, but go on up.
Take a look.
Take someone else's car. That's always a good thing that I recommend. Not your,
So you're driving?
Not your Sunday go-to-meeting car, but anyway, do that. If you were comfortable, so that component, we don't have to take any action on tonight. And again, we don't have to take any action on it in 2 weeks or in 2 months, but it's something that we have been following. If you are so inclined on the steps for the 2 new emergency lanes, which is your second motion on page 40, and that we continue to research the last 3 that Wes just mentioned of Blaisdell and Lane and Morgan, we can act on those portions of it tonight and just leave the first motion with those 2 streets tabled till we get you some more information.
So what's the will of the council? Do you want to table the whole thing, or do you want to take care of the second and third parts tonight?
I think we should take care of everything together. We're under no, critical time frame in which we've got to make these decisions. And,
All right, you make a motion then to table this motion and this subject in its entirety, and to keep it on the future agendas under unfinished business.
So move.
You got that, Madam Clerk? Seconded by Counselor Littman. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative. This motion has been, agenda item has been tabled and will continue on the council agenda under unfinished business. And you will come back to us in the not-too-distant future with,
Actually, I could come back at the next meeting, because basically we have the presentation already built from our October of last year.
we'll see what kind of,
Yeah.
We'll work it into a future agenda when it makes sense.
And just so we're clear, I don't think there's anything right now stopping you to continue doing the research you're doing with respect to those other roads. I'm not
Okay.
sure you need a separate motion for that, but we
now,
should-
how are the affected property owners going to know at what time the council's going to revisit this?
We'll make sure before we put it on an agenda, we give notice that it's going to be on an agenda 2 weeks out, so to speak, so that
Right.
it won't just show up on a Friday.
If we're not going to do it at the next meeting, they won't have to come to that
We
meeting.
will not do it at the next meeting, and we will give 2 weeks' notice that is going to be on whatever agenda going forward.
Okay, thank you.
I would have one recommendation, because we have 6, 7 roads in this category. We don't do all of them at the same time, but we do Plantation, Colonial in one group, and then we tackle the rest, in different meetings.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right, council comments.
Let's go home.
Counselor Cheney,
I didn't want to
you're
disappoint
always
you.
first in the class.
I have 2 questions tonight. One is Pearly Pond, and I know you're anxious to hear that. I did see in the Union Leader an article about Manchester cleaning up around their ponds, apparently without DES permission. And I wonder, and I know you've been working on that, and I certainly don't intend any slings and arrows to city staff, but I'm hoping before snowfall, we can see some progress.
Yep, well, city staff has been out there and done a good job of cleaning up some of the overgrown area and the invasive species in the wooded area. The arborist is set for, Amy is left, I want to say it's somewhere mid-September, somewhere in the teens, sticks in my head. I believe there was a press release that was in the paper a week or so ago that has done that. So it's a firm out of Meredith, I believe, that is well qualified and came in with a low bid, and they were going to be pruning it according to what the state, I'm not sure if it was the state arborist, but the state official who came out and looked at it and had that schematic and identified. So that's what's being pruned. Again, I believe it's next week sometime. And I believe I just saw the bid go out last week for the surveying services, and we piggybacked that onto on-call surveying professional capacity that we were ready to go to bid for anyway. So we bid that specific scope of work along with having somebody available with predetermined prices and on-call for the surveying work. So those are the 3 steps that I can share with you.
Okay. I'm looking forward to seeing some of the grass come down before too much longer. The only other thing I wanted to ask about is, the last meeting, we talked about the blinking yellow lights for, I think, Court and Main and,
Cumberland Farms, you mean?
no.
Left turn lights.
The intersection down here.
Yeah,
okay.
Court and Main.
We're working on those numbers, and we'll have them to you. We don't have them tonight.
Well, I didn't expect you did, but what I wanted to ask was, could you, while you were getting those numbers, do Guilford Ave and Lakeport and the other end of Elm Street, at least get us prices for that?
Lakeport, you actually don't need it because
Okay.
it's set up right already. You only have one lane that turns left, and it has a green arrow, and then it goes to a green light. So it's effectively the same.
But I think
As
we
you're
were
heading, as you're heading on Union Ave, going towards Shaw's.
Yep.
When you come up at that intersection.
Yeah, I'm
you
aware.
have-
I'm
Yeah,
aware.
yeah.
But I was hoping to see the blinking yellow that the state uses as opposed to the green arrow and the green.
You only do that when you have a dedicated left turn lane. And so your only dedicated left turn lane is the northbound
Right.
going toward Shaw's.
Right. I guess that's the one I was,
That,
Definitely doesn't work that way at the corner of Elm and Parade Road.
No, it doesn't.
yeah.
doesn't work what way?
Can't use a blinking
If
yellow light.
if you're going out on Parade Road and you want to turn left on Meredith Center Road, no matter what hour it is, you have to stop at a red light there, even if there's not another car for a minute. So if it's green going straight through,
Right, and
it's
I'm,
red.
Yes, I'll just point out one fact. That's a state traffic signal.
Wonderful.
So,
Okay.
So at 5 o'clock in the morning, from personal experience, you have to sit
I'm
there and
well
wait.
aware, and that's why I'm hoping we could maybe fix that.
And that's a quick left turn light.
Wait a minute. Did I just hear you say you want to facilitate a movement to the left? Is that?
Could
did I-
never happen. Could never.
All right, any other business to come before the meeting tonight?
Back around to the right.
If not, I'm going to declare the meeting adjourned at 8:52 PM.